We're going to get started. Sheets are out. Luke 9. Luke 9. Luke 9, 51, 56. Craig, did you say you have an announcement? All right. We have a short announcement from Craig Cates.
It is a small announcement because besides being Independence Day celebration last night, the fireworks herald the arrival of little Evelyn Cates, my second grandbaby.
Oh, wow. Congratulations. Congratulations. We're Luke 9, chapter 51, Samaritan opposition. As the time approached for Jesus to be taken up to heaven, Jesus resolutely set off for Jerusalem. And he sent messengers on ahead who went into a Samaritan village to get things ready for him. But the people there did not welcome him because he was heading for Jerusalem. When the disciples James and saw this, they asked, "Lord, do you want us to call fire down from heaven to destroy them?" But Jesus turned and rebuked them. Then he and his disciples went to another village. All right, so to break this down a little bit, you have to look at Luke 9 in light of John chapter 4. And maybe we can turn there, keep your finger on Luke 9, go to John chapter 4, verses 39, 43, when Jesus is having this discussion with the woman at the well. John 4, 39, 43. A little bit interesting about this woman at the well is when you see that, what time of day does Jesus meet this woman at the well in John chapter 4? Anybody look around there? Yes, it's noon. John 4 verse 6 says Jesus was at the well with the woman at noon. Now, little trivia here. Trivia. Why do you think this woman went at 12 o'clock?
Nobody wouldn't see anybody there.
Wouldn't be anybody there. Why did she want to go when nobody was there? Nobody liked her. She was living in sin. She knew her history. And she would get water at the most warmest part of the day. Most of the people would go in the morning or in the evening when the sun was down or just rising. So it wouldn't be so burdensome, because this poor woman, she has to go to this well, and what does she have to do with the water once she gets it? She has to carry it back. And that's not something that she looks forward to, but in order to save some of herself from experiencing shame, she avoids the crowds. Jesus has conversation with her, and he says, "Can I have a drink?" And she says, "Well, why would a Jew ask a Samaritan for a drink?" Now, how did she know Jesus was Jewish? How did she know that? I mean, you got two strangers meeting in town, meeting at the... I tell you, this Jessica, she's really on the roll today. Yes, the Jews dressed differently. They had something on the bottom of a hem of their tunics, which communicated that they were of the Jewish faith. And the second thing is their dialect also communicated the difference between the Samaritan and the Jewish dialect. So the Samaritan woman knew that he was Jewish, and Jesus, as God, foreknew that she was a Samaritan. So what's kind of fascinating is who's there to witness this event and this conversation? No one. You know, that's a big no-no, isn't it, in counseling? You know, that a man, a pastor should never be left alone with a woman, especially this one, right? Because her history's kind of shady. So I find this kind of interesting that Jesus actually has conversation as he dismisses these disciples away. Why do you think he may have done this with, first of all, dismissing the disciples?
He knows everything.
He knows everything that's going to happen. And how would the disciples respond to this Samaritan woman if they were there? Not well. He probably couldn't even have a conversation with her. He needed them gone, because they would just constantly harp about it. And they kind of, question it when they do get back. So the woman recognized in verse 9, he's Jewish. And why are you asking me to drink? And Jesus flips it and said, well, if you knew who I was, you would give me a drink. I would give you the living water. Of course, the woman says, well, that sounds good because I'm tired of hauling this stuff all the time. Give me the water you're talking about to save me some time. The conversation then goes on about her living conditions. He goes right to the heart of the matter, right? Go call your husband and come back. Well, she has no husband. As Jesus says, you're right. You've had 5 of them. And the man you now have is not your husband. What you've just said is quite true. So what does she feel about this now? She busted? No, she's busted. She's busted. And what do you think would surprise her about this? That he would know. How do you know? How would you know that I've had 5 and that I'm not married to the guy I'm living with now? Jesus goes to the heart of the matter, and he wants to deal with her sin. And what does she do in verse 19? She changes the subject. It's just too sensitive. I'm not ready there to talk about that with a complete stranger. So she goes into a theological question. What's the theological question she proposes to Jesus? Verse 19. Where do you worship? You see, in the Old Testament times, there's 2 mountains. There was Mount Gerizim, and then there's Mount Zion, and the Samaritans thought that the blessed site of the temple should be Mount Gerizim, and that the Jews were wrong. And the Jews said Mount Zion was the place for the temple, and the Samaritans were wrong. So now we have to get into the detail of why the divisions between the Jews and Samaritans. Who are these Samaritans? If you know a little bit about the Old Testament history, the kingdom of Israel got divided into the north and south, kind of like our Civil War. They had our Civil War lasted 5 years. Their Civil War lasted like for 400 years. It was a long time. Eventually, the north, because of the gross sins that were happening up in the north, God said, I've had it with the northern kingdom. You're done. I'm sending Assyria in you to punish you and discipline you. You're going to go into a timeout, which is eternal. You see, with the north, when God sent the people of Assyria in to destroy the north, he never gave them a term timeout. He did on the south. So when the Assyrians come in and just devastate the north, just destroy it, they're on the edge of Jerusalem, and Hezekiah is like really concerned that they're going to just destroy us too. God saves them. God saves Judah, the south kingdom, and the north gets destroyed. So one of the things back in those cultures, the way they would destroy a nation is they would destroy their culture. So what are ways to destroy a nation's culture? Intermarry. Yeah, intermarry so that eventually you don't even have an ancestry anymore you could brag about. So, and I've mentioned this before, that one of the things that has happened in our country is when the Europeans came over, they basically destroyed the culture of the Native Americans because their culture was based upon what, what was the culture of Native Americans based upon? Their whole culture was based upon land, land, land. And we took them off of it. So, you know, we continue to move west. We continue to move west with the Native Americans. And what type of, and Native Americans got beat, you know, cowboys and Indians. Indians always lost, not all the time, but most of the time. They ended up losing, so therefore the power or the authority of the European Caucasians basically gave the Native Americans what kind of land in the end? Sorry land? Yeah, yeah. I mean, land that they didn't want, right? So that's one of the reasons why Native Americans to this day kind of struggle, because they have no ability to reinstate their culture, reinstate their history, their appreciation for the land. It's been taken away. So far with the Samaritans, what they were, their blood was taken away from them. They were no longer able to kind of say, hey, I am a descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, because somewhere in the law we got lost, because the Assyrians defeated other countries and they put them in the pool and they say, you guys now intermarry and have children and you're going to lose your identity, which they did. So over the course of time, Assyria does get beat by Babylon, which is the country that comes in next into power. And over therefore, when Babylon gets destroyed, then these northern Samaritans get to go back into Israel again. So the thing with the Jews on the south side, God gave them a term timeout with Babylon because they continued to sin and sin and sin. And God said, okay, I'm tired of you. I'm going to put you in a timeout. And he gives them a time. Do you know how many years it was for a timeout? 70 years. 70 years. He was going to put him in a 70-year timeout. He never said that with the North. He never gave a timed timeout with the North.
I never had time.
Oh boy, Gary.
Why do you think, okay, one side, 70 years. Why do you think God did that?
Why do you think God did that? Why didn't he give him a timeout for the North? The argument that you read in the Old Testament times is that the sins of the North were so much atrocious, God just kind of said, I'm done. You know, there is the book of Hosea, which is one of the most challenging books to read, not as far as narrative, but just the thought concept that God asked this prophet Hosea to go and marry a harlot and then to have children. And then he says, I'm going to name the kids for you. And the first child he names for the harlot, born of the harlot, is Lo Ami, which is Hebrew, which means you are not my people. You would think about that every time Hosea would call his firstborn, Lo Ami, he was always thinking, what was that meaning of the name? God has said through my son that these are not his people anymore. Those names, I just kind of wonder how the Old Testament lived with those negative names they got. You know, you got positive names, but there are other people that had negative names that God said, you're going to name this child this way for the fact it's going to be a statement of how I feel toward my people this time. And so Lo Ami was his firstborn, and translating in English, it is, you are no longer my people.
I'm just kind of wondering about why there was no time limit on the north, but on the south could have been to maintain the integrity of the bloodline. Right?
There was the promised land, so you're good on that. There was a promise of the Davidic kingdom, you know. God promised David that his kingdom, there will always be someone on the Davidic throne. All right, so let's look at that, you know, to this day. Is there someone still on the Davidic throne? Yeah, who is it? Jesus. Yeah, you know, it's that children's sermon, right? You know the answer, get the question, get it right, it's got to be Jesus, you know? It's the way it is. Yeah, there's still someone on the Davidic throne, Jesus. Of course, the Jews don't recognize that Jesus is on the Davidic throne, but we do. And his kingdom reigns for eternity, just as the angel Gabriel told Mary that his throne shall endure forever when he announced the Annunciation to her. So the Davidic throne is still, but yes, until the Messiah was coming, there was that promise to keep that Davidic throne alive, the Davidic blood alive. So we've got these Samaritans, they mingle themselves back into Israel, and they feel that they've got the truth more so than the Jews. And so therefore you've got mixed breeds. That's one reason why the Jews didn't like them. You couldn't even really verify that they had Jewish blood in them. Second reason is that when the people of Israel were released from Babylon to go back and build the temple, you can read in the story of Nehemiah and Ezra that they came to want to help them build the temple up. The Samaritans came and wanted to say, hey, I heard you guys got free again, and Cyrus has told us that you can build the temple. We want to help. Huh? The building committee. We want to help. We want to help. And what was the response from the building committee toward these Samaritans? No, thank you. No, thank you. Why did the building committee say no to Samaritan presence on the building committee? Because they were dirty Samaritans, they weren't full Jews, and they wanted purification taking place here. So they said no to the Samaritans. So then Samaritans made a mess. They went and wrote up to some other people and they said, hey, check the history of these people. You will find that their history is they like to rebel. And if you give them any independence, you build their temple and treasure one more time again, all they're going to do is use it to go against your authority. And so because they petitioned the government of the Medes and Persians, the Medes and Persians said, there's got to be a stop on the building project until we find out more. So they were mad about that, and they never got over that. I mean, eventually it got built, but they made a headache and they put a stop on it. The third thing that Josephus says is another reason why the Jews didn't like the Samaritans was this. You've got half Jews and half Gentile blood in you. All right? So Samaritans would say they were what when it was going good for the Jews? Jews. And when it wasn't going good for the Jews, they would say they were Gentiles. They were flippant all the time. They weren't consistent. They just weren't somebody you could trust. So therefore, the Jews really despised the Samaritans, and the Samaritans in then turn, of course, despised the Jews. So we have this situation going on here between these two nations. And Jesus and this woman are setting up what takes place here in Luke chapter 9. How does Jesus answer the question? He says, the Jews say we're supposed to be on Zion, and we say we're supposed to be on Mount Gerizim. And Jesus responds, how? In John chapter 9, verse 21. John 4, 21.
Neither place, we're not worship either place.
Yeah. We will not worship either place. That the time you do not know, the time is coming, is now come when the true worshipers will worship the Father in the Spirit and in truth, for they are the kind of worshipers the Father seeks. God is Spirit, and his worshipers must worship in spirit and truth. So, does it really become an important thing about location in worship? No, spiritually, you can't really argue anything that it's got to be at this place. I mean, when we look at the building committee, we're not really looking at a spiritual reason of why Christ the King needs to be at this certain spot. No, we have not received anything from God saying, you must build here and stay. If we did get that, we'd be in trouble if we were going to relocate, so we have gotten no verification from God that this is a sacred spot that we cannot move away from. We worship in spirit and truth. Do you need a building to worship in spirit and truth? You do not need a building to worship in spirit and truth. You can worship anywhere where there's word and sacrament being given. That's the church. The community is the people, it's not the building. Now, one of the things, when you talk about these sacred spaces, maybe you know a little bit about the Roman Catholic Church. When a Roman Catholic Church relocates, what do they usually do to the old building? They only have two options I've owned in my history of 61 years. When a Roman Catholic Church relocates, what do they do with the old building? They tear it down, or they reuse it, like the Roman Catholic Church here is repurposing the event, still in control and still ownership. But if they are not going to repurpose the building, they will tear it down. Why?
I don't want anybody that's not a Christian.
Yeah, I mean, you go and you sell it, and it, this is a building that was used as sacred. People were baptized here. People were married sacred here. They were receiving the Lord's body and blood here. And you don't want it to sell it to some place that just basically desacralizes every sacred event there. It's kind of like you don't take the baptism font, put it up for sale, and think, oh yeah, it's all right if you use it for a punch bowl at your house, right? Because it had sacred purpose. It's the same thing with the American flag, right? What do we do with the American flag when it's used? You burn it. You have respect for these things, even though it doesn't make the church. It was a place where sacred activity did take place. So that's one of the things when you think about selling your church and stuff, you want to make sure it's not going to be used as a building which just totally counters what took place there during your 52 years in this building. That's a challenge of selling a church. And in the Roman church, they won't sell it. If they can't repurpose it, they'll level it for that reason. Yeah. So there's this concept to keep in mind as we're looking at this conversation between Jesus Christ and the woman. Jesus says it's in spirit and truth, and therefore now he doesn't tell them it's got to be in Jerusalem, doesn't tell them that it's got to be in Gerasene. So in Luke chapter 9, as we go back to it, what does Jesus basically show by his behavior? Where is he supposed to be? Luke sets this up in 51. What words does he use to really communicate a message about his idea about this question? Verse 9:51. Where was Jesus heading? Where do you think the Samaritan said he should head? Gerasene. Yeah, you should be heading over here. And you're heading over to Jerusalem. So they're kind of what? They're angry. They're angry. They're mad. Verse 52, he sent messengers on ahead who went to the Samaritan village to get things ready for him, but the people there did not welcome him. Because what was he endorsing? He was endorsing Jerusalem over Gerasene. And apparently they didn't get the memo that Jesus said, this is where the event is going to take place, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm saying that the worship has to take place in Jerusalem. Lord, and so the disciples, James and John, for their response they received from the Samaritans, they want to call down fire from heaven. But Jesus turned to rebuke them. What's the problem here? And Jesus sees there's a problem on both sides. What's the problem on both sides here?
There's animosity between.
There's animosity, and Jesus says this is one of the 7 words of the cross. They just don't understand. The Jews don't understand. You guys don't understand. The Samaritans don't understand. This is going to take place in Jerusalem, not because this is where the temple is going to be. It's just God's design for this event. But worship will be done in spirit and in truth. It's not done specifically here at Jerusalem for the sake that I'm endorsing Jerusalem as the place it is to be. So what happened over the course of history of the church? Jerusalem, Jesus says, we worship in spirit and truth. But when the Muslims came over and took over the Holy Land, did the church just stand down? No, they didn't. They didn't move. I mean, what did the Pope do? He gathered crusades, right? He gathered crusades. And what was the goal of the crusades? To take back the Holy Land and to kill the infidels, there was holy war between the Crusades and the Muslims over the Holy Land. We were there just a few years ago, but when I first went there in 1998 and I saw all the destruction of the temples and stuff, because When the Muslims took over, they didn't think the statues and all that were idolatry. They would destroy things. There was a lot of beautiful artwork that was destroyed over the course of time. And I always thought about this verse in John chapter 4, that we worship in spirit and truth. Because if Jesus would have said, no, Jerusalem is the place it needs to be, how many parties would be fighting for Jerusalem now? Be three, right? There'd be the Muslims, there'd be the Jews, and there'd be the Christians. But our kingdom's not of this world. So at least it's down to those two. And I kind of wonder sometimes when I went in 88, I said to my dad on a bus, I said, you know, maybe God had a purpose for having the Muslims and the Crusades destroy a lot of these relics. Because if they were still standing, maybe the church would make too big of a deal of them. He had a plan. And to try and communicate, this is not your home, people. We have the new Jerusalem. The Jerusalem from above, not Jerusalem from below. So what was the name, therefore, that James and John was their nickname? Sons of Thunder. Yeah. That's just a little bit of a major insight on why you got this tension in Luke 9:51.
Not to get political, the evangelicals really, and as a conservative, I support Israel, but I had a couple of real conservative pastors said the Israel back then is not the Israel today. And we made too much of a deal. That's God's holy place.
Right.
So, are we supposed to back off on all this craziness going on in the world? Muslims want it. There it is. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. So are you asking me here, Chester? I'm gonna need a lawyer.
You see what I mean? Going on in Israel right now. Who wants to screw with the apple God?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you got to respect the Jews. Even Paul says that in Romans chapter 9. You know, theirs is the covenant, theirs is the people, there's the ancestry. You have, but the same thing, you have to respect everybody's ancestry, not just one or the other. And there's that blessing that's found in Abraham in Genesis chapter 12. He who blesses you, I will bless. He who curses you, I will curse. So there's these things that give indication about how the Bible says we should look upon the people of Israel. The question that I think we get down to is 1948, you know, when Israel was made a political state, 1948. And you look at that situation, and if you've done some study in history on it, I kind of find that's interesting. Do you know why, more of the reason why, again, this is just my take on it, why did the United Nations reinstate the country of Israel in 1948? Do you, Jan?
Because of the killing of 6 million Jews.
Well, the killing of 6 million Jews, but the other reason is nobody wanted the Jews in their country. Britain was major player in the United Nations roles in 1948. A lot of the Jews were coming into Britain and England at the time. They were like, where are we going to put these people? I know what, we'll give them their own country. And so in 1948, the British played a major role in taking that Palestine area, which they were under control, colonization at the time, and they were going to say, hey, we're ruling this area anyway, we'll just go ahead and turn it back over. And so the country of Israel was really stated back in 1948, and Britain and many of the United States play a major role in establishing Israel in 48. And what has taken place is that when you mention these pastors and others, the evangelicals, there is this idea that if you are a millennialist, you know, that you believe that there's going to be this 1,000-year kind of, and dispensational theology, which many evangelicals hold to, dispensational theology, that one of the dispensational phases is you've got to establish Jerusalem to be an independent, free state of peace. So you've got what's called Christian Zionist. Have you ever heard of that word, Christian Zionist? Yeah. Christian Zionists are Christians who believe that Zion must be reinstated physically.
the conservative Lutheran pastors, are not for.
No, they're not Zionists, but you have a major Zionist presence in
I was
America.
shocked the first time I heard it, I said, whoo, you know? But I knew their theology for sure. And by the way, Churchill did not support Jewish strategy.
I'm not sure about that. I just know in some readings that I read, yeah, I'm not sure about where Churchill stood. I just know that I knew that Britain controlled the area in 48, and I know that they had a problem with all the Jews since they left Germany and they were all displaced. Where do we put them? Nobody really wanted them for some reason. It's just amazing. Everybody was anti-Semitic, and so let's give them their own country and solve the problem.
That fulfilled the prophecy in the Old Testament.
What prophecy are you referring to?
That they were all going to come back and get their money back after 2,000 years, whatever it was. God promised them they were going to get their money back.
I need to probably look a little more at that verse you want to refer to, Janice, when you mention that. When we talk about all...
Wasn't it talking about Ezekiel and the dry bones were all going to come back together?
Well, that's what we look at. When you want to talk about that prophecy, what does that land signify? Paul talks about this in Romans 11, all Israel will be saved. What's that mean? All Israel will be saved. There's the question that every Christian must interpret it, and upon that Bible verse, it all stands and falls. All Israel will be saved. What is Paul saying there? Some Christian Zionists say that all the Jews are going to have this mass conversion. Others, Christians, say Israel is not of the blood of Abraham, it's the faith of Abraham. So they would argue, therefore, are we Israelites? Yes. So all Israel, Jews and Christians, all who believe in Jesus Christ as the Son of God, is Israel. All who believe that Jesus is the Son of God will be saved. All Israel will be saved. It's not just necessarily a flesh descendancy, it's a promise. Because Paul will argue throughout his writings that that salvation is based upon not blood, but upon the promise. The promise. And what was the promise? Abraham got the promise that through his son, the nations will be blessed.
But that he promised that land to them that whole time too, when he dispersed them.
He promised them the land, but if you look in the book of Kings, he said, I will take you out of here the moment you rebel.
Yeah, well, he did. He dispersed them for all that time, and then he promised I won't bring out back.
Well, that one I'm not aware of. I mean, if you can find that, I would like to know that one. That one I'm not aware of. I just know that he's going to bring him back.
Well, why would he promise that land as a covenant to Abraham and did not ever bring him back to it? Why would he promise him that land?
Because he had it. That's the question that you're asking, Janice, is the promise conditional? Well,
I mean, they messed up. God kept getting mad at them, yes. They just kept falling into the idols. They come back to the line, and then they fall apart, come back and fall apart.
Book of Judges kind of shows that cycle. They mess up, they get back, and God restores their independence and restores them back to their land. But
after the Romans came and destroyed the temple and everything, after that, they didn't hear from God for 400 years.
yeah, and Jesus kind of says in Matthew about the destruction that's it. It's done. And one of the things that is helpful for the Christian is, again, like I was mentioning, that once Jesus says that the temple is down, who is now the temple found in? Christ. Jesus said, destroy this temple, I will rebuild it in 3 days. This format is over.
Well, they're going to rebuild it. Third time when they accept Christ.
Well, that's the question, is how literal does this all come to play? So we don't really know.
Well, there's already talks about it.
Yeah, there's talks, but the question is it biblically founded? And that's where, we've had this question of our millennial discussion, and I'm working on a study which I can share with you guys later down, but you can see how complicated this gets. That's why I'm taking my time and putting it together. I want to make sure that I communicate it in a way that is best understood as possible. Because this is very complicated when you look at millennial thoughts and you look at the promises in the Old Testament, what this means and what's happened in the New. It's challenging. So I'm putting something together, and it's going to take me a little bit of time, but we get to that.
The matter of Holy Land, at once upon a time, I just thought it belongs to the Jews. God gave it to them as an inheritance and all that, and all this other political stuff is terrible. But when the passage in Acts, I think, is determinative. I mean, Jesus would suffer and die in Jerusalem because that was Mount Sinai.
Right.
But there is the gospel, you shall be witness to me from Jerusalem, Samaria, and to the uttermost parts of the world.
Right.
And certainly Jerusalem is not the hub from where the gospel comes. So Jerusalem has served its function.
Yeah, that's so, yeah.
And we gotta think more about global, Jerusalem. I mean, we're Jerusalem.
Right.
Here, the gospel goes out to the world.
Yeah.
So
echoing what you're saying there, Pastor Lamb, because I agree, is that the Old Testament format has been changed. It's been reformatted. Where we, like St. Paul wants to argue, look at Galatians chapter 4, where we talk about the New Jerusalem. You got the Old Jerusalem and the New Jerusalem. And in Galatians 4, the New Jerusalem is being referred to more of a spiritual type of thing than a land-based situation. So check that out. Like I said, I will work a little bit on that because it is a challenging concept. Well, you're getting the millennial thought here, and it's hard to stay away from it when you start looking at these promises. I know that I've had to deal with this all this time over the 30-some years in the ministry about how this plays out, because you've got all these verses in the Old Testament communicating this promised land, but there's those verses in the scripture that makes it very clear too that this was all conditional, that I will take this land away from you. It's there. I know those verses are in the book of Kings. The day you sin, I will take this land away from you and not necessarily give it back to you, or I'm going to reformat the promise. So we look at reformat. Now, when Abraham, I want to go back to that here very quickly and conclude with this thought, as well as with David. Abraham, the promise is that of your seed, your nation shall be blessed. Paul will argue this too in Galatians. Paul will say that the seed that Abraham's going to be blessed by is not Isaac. And it's not going to be the people of Israel. Who's the seed of Abraham that the nations are going to be blessed by? Who is it? Jesus. Jesus. Jesus is the seed of Abraham. It wasn't Isaac. Isaac was just kind of one of the instruments God was using to get to the promised seed. That's what St. Paul argues in Galatians. It's, Jesus is the seed that really was the promise. And I find the same thing taking place with David. David is promised that he will have a descendant that will live on his throne forever and will be faithful. Can you really think that was Solomon? No. But did David think it was? Yes. But who really was the faithful heir of the throne? Jesus. It's always like we're going deeper here, God says. We're going deeper here than just stuff on the surface. On the surface, it looks like Isaac is the fulfillment of the promise, and that Solomon is the fulfillment of the promise. You can see that Solomon makes some major mistakes. He cannot be a fulfillment. How many wives does he marry? A bunch, 700 some wives, for the sake of, some on the side, yeah. All for the sake of political alliances. And Isaac had his issues too. Isaac, he favored the wrong call. He favored Esau over Jacob. Isaac wasn't the guy that was, and then he had issues in Egypt as his father did. He wasn't as faithful as you would think he was to be. There was issues. So the only one that really is faithful and sinless of these seeds is Jesus. That's it. That's where it gets down to. So yeah, I mean, I'm open to looking at verses you have on this because I want to put this together. So if you've got verses you wish for me to look at when I'm putting this millennial study together, submit them to me. and we will investigate them, and we will put them in that study and have a discussion on them. So anyway, anything really quick here? We're a few minutes over time. Couple? No? Now let's close with a word of prayer. Father, we ask, O Lord, for your blessings upon the study of your word, and we ask that you would continue to enlighten us on what this word means for our present and our future. Lord, sometimes it's difficult for us with our eyes and our hearts to know just exactly what's being communicated in your word, but through the power of the Holy Spirit, you enable us to see and believe. Continue to bless us with this Spirit intervention as we seek to know what your will and counsel is for your church, and specifically, O Lord, for this church next Sunday. We ask for your blessings upon all of our decisions, that they be in accordance with your will. In your Son's name, amen.